finally fly to Minnesota and go to this dangerous inner city school.
Not dangerous.
Well, two things I immediately learned. It's not an inner city school, it is an urban school. And the second thing I learned was, it is not dangerous. Each and every one of Laura's scholars were the most respectful scholars of any color that I have ever met. And the only derogatory thing that was ever said to me was, "You be Laura's mama?" I said, "Yeah, I'm Laura's mom." Or actually they would say, "You be Miss Hoagie's mama?" And I'd say, "Yeah, I'm Miss Hoagie's mom." And they'd say, "You ain't got no booty." And I said, "That's right." And coming away from that experience and all the other experiences that I had in her classroom, my heart bleeds for every single one of her scholars who have been mistreated, mislabeled, misunderstood, used in ways that we cannot even imagine. Laura has shared personal stories with me about so many of her students. And typical of Laura, and I have to share this one, Laura, because this one is so intense in my mind. Laura only checked her mailbox once a week at school. So of course stuff was just flowing out of it. Okay, that's fair. So Friday afternoon, she went down and she went and checked her mailbox. One of her students was in the office, handcuffed. And she said that took a while to get used to. Being in an urban school is to see students being handcuffed in school. And he said, "Miss Hoagie, Miss Hoagie, Miss Hoagie," I can do it. But whenever they would say Miss Hoagie 3 times, she knew that they were in trouble, asking her sincerely for help. "Miss Hoagie, Miss Hoagie, Miss Hoagie, I didn't do it." Apparently the police officer went to say something, to which Laura, all 5'5" of her, looks up at the police officer and says, "Excuse me, I want to know what it was that my scholar did not do." Again, being a white woman of privilege, the 2 white officers zipped their lip. The scholar was able to tell Laura what he didn't do. So Laura turned around to the attendance secretary and said, "Well, so-and-so, okay, he's in my class this period, he's in my class that period. Check the attendance." Right on time, he stayed during the whole class. He did not wait to go to the bathroom. He left on time. So it's very unlikely that the student that is handcuffed is the student you are truly looking for. So the student was unhandcuffed. He flew into Laura's open arms and says to her, "You saved me, you saved me, you saved me." Well, what did that tell me? All young men of color, regardless of wearing a hoodie, all look the same. And they all act the same. They're bad. They're evil. They commit all kinds of crimes. And that's something we totally have to get out of our heads. That is not true.
I would just have followed Laura on Facebook and have learned lots over the years she was at Edison. probably one of the best teachers I've had in this whole process, was just following and listening and paying attention to what's going on. And we have friends that live in Northeast Minneapolis, so we hear it from old people, and then we hear it from being at Edison High School. So I appreciate it, and as we continue to learn and dismantle, I've really appreciated your sharing on Facebook. Sometimes Facebook is just okay to get information.
I would agree with that. You know, Laura, it's been a privilege to listen. You know, the group I've written on Facebook. Yeah, you're an awesome teacher. You know, for your scholars and for those of us who are also your scholars. You know, because you lived it.
And there's so much learning still to do and so much work that still needs to be done.
How many teachers do you have, ex-teachers?
Sunday school teachers?
How many of you teachers have lost a student? How many of you have lost one?
I stopped counting.
Yeah.
So Laura, what are you doing now at Western to try to teach the new teachers that are growing there?
I mean, really the best I can do is just to bring in my experiences into the classrooms at Western and the lectures. And I only really lecture 2 courses, and they're Intro to Special Education. One is designed for the people that are going to be special education majors, and then the other is designed for your future secondary, middle, and high school general ed teachers. But what that course overviews are the different disability categories according to special education law. And my 2 favorite lectures to give are the ones on specific learning disabilities and then emotional behavior disabilities. And emotional behavior disability is a category, especially in Minneapolis, that was so rooted in racism and overqualifies and over-identifies young people of color. Because if we look to when they were identified, it was probably 1st, 2nd, or 3rd grade. And let's be real, they had some white lady as their teacher. They probably experienced some sort of trauma at home. So they get to school and they kick and they hit and they say no. And that's not what the white lady wanted them to do. So they labeled them with an emotional behavior disability. So it's going back to that holistic teaching and to really think before we throw labels on children that yes, in special ed you can exit from an IEP, but do they really exit from that label of emotional behavior disability that was placed on them, not by their peers, but from a society of privilege and power?
Well, it's one of my grandchildren had an IEP all the way through, and it's just assumed you won't go to college, you won't do a lot of things, and they don't have a chance to even know what's assumed about them. And that's very heartbreaking.
Well, and nationally, 50% of those with an EBD label don't graduate high school.
What are the labels? What do they mean?
Individual education plan.
So students receiving special education services. But then by law, there's 13 different categories of disability to get to that service.
I know Laura because we play words with friends.
She's good.
She is wicked. But it's a privilege. It's a privilege to know you. And so I really appreciate you doing.
And I agree that you're the next generation of Christ and servant going to beautiful life. We think you put me to shame.
Not my intention.
You did all this learning by immersed in the reality. How can we in Whatcom County attempt to get some little piece of that since we have no place? There's no place in this county, I don't think, where you can be immersed in anything anywhere near what you were in. How do we attempt to do a little bit of that learning?
I mean, there are some good books. Kenny Eram's How to Be an Anti-Racist is a good book. Also, just understanding the history of slavery into policing and the prison system is something I think everyone should learn about from that historical context. If you don't like reading, then if you haven't seen the documentary 13th on Netflix, very good documentary on the 13th Amendment, and literally how we went from, quote unquote, ending slavery into prisons, which was just a legalized form of slavery, and seeing how that plays out within society. The others is, if you ever see something that you know is wrong and unjust, then say something.
And do something.
I do think in this county we have maybe not as strong a population of Black individuals, but we certainly have a large population of Hispanic and Indigenous. And we see that in schools where, and talk about special ed, I have a daughter that's job is different in the school system, but kids that come in that don't speak the language well, and so then don't do well, so then are labeled special ed. So her job now is to work with teachers to how do we recognize if not label and put kids in special ed, because they really aren't special ed kids. They really are just it's language, learning the language, understanding the culture, and then how do we teach?
Right, and it's also recognizing when you say like learning the language and the culture. So who says that English and the white dominant culture is the best culture? Right. Like I had the hardest time actually as an English teacher because my students were writing not in the grammar structure that I was taught was correct, but how can I tell them that their use of ebonics is incorrect? Because it's technically not. It's just me saying that white grammar is better than your African American grammar. And that's also a system of oppression within the schools.
Hey Laura, so as we live in a society where people are classified as woke, and I'm hearing what you're saying, we should read some stuff to unearth some stuff where some schools and maybe even universities are being challenged of that. What can be done to wake people up who are trying to suppress that history of what has happened?
Yeah.
I mean, in that sense, it comes down to lawmakers and voting.
Yeah. Which is unfortunate.
Washington is a better state
Right.
to make those gains than some states that shall remain nameless, sort of Texas.
I mean, we look at a possible presidential candidate who wants to suppress certain things coming out, and it's I mean, obviously we can vote against that, but it's like, wow.
Well, and I think too, it's having those tough conversations with maybe people that you consider to be your friends or family members even. Why are you voting this way? And then to think about, again, what are those ideological views that are rising up or pressing down, and then really thinking about that whole structure of it all. And if they're voting because it keeps them comfortable, again, that's the biggest thing I have learned about anti-racist work, is that it's a lot to do with reflecting on your own self and starting to get really uncomfortable. Because if I can't be uncomfortable for my African American colleague who really is uncomfortable saying something to our principal, then my silence is just keeping that status quo. And I'm not doing what is just for her voice to be heard and for that system to be dismantled.
Laura, talking about being uncomfortable is an embodied experience, you know? It makes me think about Resma Menachem and his work, and I think he's in Minnesota, is that right?
I don't know.
Do you know of his work?
No.
He wrote a book called My Grandmother's Hands that's about healing and, I can't remember the subtitle of it, but how we need policy changes and those kinds of things, but it's not just an intellectual exercise.
Yeah.
Unless we all do, as white bodies, our work of healing, we continue things on. And so I just recommend that book called My Grandmother's Hands by Resma Menachem, and he has a great interview on, I think it's on eating.
I think the only part of your story that didn't quite follow, connect the dots with, was when the teachers, right after the Trump selection, when they were out clapping and cheering, and like you said, the students certainly weren't saying anything, welcome to school, but were they actually applauding the election?
No, they were
Okay.
genuinely applauding the fact that the students showed up to school.
But the students, this like, why are you cheering? We just elected a monster.
Right, and again, it's that intent versus impact, and if you're saying or doing something because it, like, you get more of that positive feeling out of it than the people that you're intending to help.
Yeah.
Like that toxic positivity of white culture is very still prevalent, and it's not, like, it would have been better to just acknowledge, like, yeah, the vote sucked. We're glad you're at school today.
Gotcha.
But when we, again, try to have that air of neutrality and not taking a stance, toxic positivity takes over. Yes, Mom?
So there were and still are lots of ways in which Laura's scholars still connect and honor her. I don't think anybody who's experienced Miss Hoagland will ever forget her. But the night of the Black Lives Don't Matter riots, North Minneapolis was literally on fire.
No, it was South Minneapolis that was
South
on fire
Minneapolis was
because
Capricorn started first and then North.
Floyd was murdered himself, but the
People
whole city was on
couldn't
lockdown.
People of color could not get to their food banks. They could not get to the other infrastructures that they really needed. There was an 8 o'clock curfew. So Laura was getting all of these texts to go, is it okay if so-and-so texts you? Is it okay if so-and-so texts you? Well, the honor was, is that she had previous scholars 3 or 4 years down the road, 8 or 9 people in the family, they were not able to get to their food bank, and they needed somebody that they could trust to get them food because they had no food in the house. So who could they trust? Miss Hoagie. So she cleaned out her pantry, she cleaned out her fridge, and she was running all around Northeast dropping off food. And then again, she had white privilege. Nobody was going to stop her. But had they called any of their friends of color, well, they would have been arrested because they were out after curfew. You know, not that Laura really wanted to stay out after curfew, but, you know, when babies have no milk, you know, she was going to make sure that children had milk and gummy things that stuck to their teeth and whatever. But anyway, you know, and so that, I think, speaks to, that's a level where her scholars really honored her because she is an individual that they could trust and
with no repercussions.
What is waiting for your scholars after they graduate? Do they just end up back on the street or not back on the? Is there any, what happens to them?
I mean, that's also a good question. We do have former Edison scholars that go on to college and do very well, but again, we look at, how much is college now? How are they affording it? How are they getting loans? It still is that system, and it's also a societal system of why are we pushing college and university and not pushing trades and, community college just as equally and celebrating those same successes. Representation. So we also look to books, and for those of you, with grandchildren, buying more diverse books so that at an early age, that positive representation is out. Like, just recently, it galls me, but Florida, of course, banned the book Hair Love, which is it's also a really cute little short on Disney about an African-American father and daughter, and they're going to the hospital to visit mom who has cancer, and the dad is trying to braid her hair.
What's the name, Laura?
Hair Love.
Hair Love.
Why would they ban that?
I mean, I honestly don't understand, except for the fact that they're showing a loving, functional relationship of a black family. The book Fry Bread, about, indigenous culture and the making of fry bread amongst generations, also banned. Diary of Anne Frank, completely banned in the state of Texas.
Laura, can you talk a bit about your perceptions of the connection between racism and economic conditions? Again, I don't know the draw in the high school that you were at, but I mean, talk about that relationship of your scholars coming forward, that relationship of their experience then coming into your orbit.
Can you rephrase that?
It's the relationship between racism and kind of economics, about backgrounds of your children coming forward that you spend time with.
So, in Minneapolis particularly, it does go back to the 40s and 50s and the redlining when it comes to housing. And so North Minneapolis, ironically, before it was redlined, it was the thriving Norwegian Lutheran neighborhood. And then the city was growing, and so it became redlined into the essentially ghetto at the time for African Americans. And then we look to, you can see it, like how certain neighborhoods are structured. And we see this in Bellingham when we look towards North Bellingham and Birchwood, which has a lower socioeconomic background, a lot more Latinx. And where's the grocery store? Where's the food? So you look to these neighborhoods and you start to see the food deserts and other ways that it has been purposely designed to rid them of their money, to rid them of health, to rid them of choices and options, because it was the only place where housing was affordable. And then within North Minneapolis, there are 2 high schools, which one had to shut down and was starting to rebuild, mainly due to a lot of violence. And so therefore, students and families made the choice to cross the river into Northeast, because at least when they got off the city buses and were walking to Edison, the likelihood of a stray bullet going by was not as existent. But I rarely worked with a scholar who actually lived in Northeast Minneapolis. And I've had many scholars who have been shot just because it was a stray bullet. And the amount of gun violence in North Minneapolis is crazy insane. And trying to teach a first hour class was nearly impossible because they were tired because they didn't sleep all night.
So, Laura, any given year, taking your caseload of 40, 50 students, how many ever you had, so judging by those families, how many had an adult or two in the home who were gainfully employed?
Like 5 out of 9 years.
Yeah, so out of 40 homes, maybe 5 gainfully employed adults.
I can't even think of too many that had 2 parents at home, let alone 2 gainfully employed parents at home.
Correct.
That Minneapolis thing, there's racism in Minneapolis. It's absolutely astonishing. In Minnesota, it's absolutely astonishing.
From an educational standpoint, Minnesota is the most racist state, educationally speaking.
But one of their practices, you talked about, right? One of their practices was in the 50s, and as a background, the only way my dad ever accumulated wealth was through buying and selling his homes. The only way he accumulated any wealth because it was a different thing. Well, they would take black people in the 50s and they would drag them into these red line areas. They'd sell them a house for $21,000. Not bad. They'd sign a contract. The house was theirs. If you wanted to paint it, it was your problem. If the boiler blew up, that was your problem. If the stove blew up, that was your problem. You missed 2 payments, they'd take the house away from you, throw you out, and sell the house to somebody else for $25,000. So instead of you accumulating the wealth of owning a home, the white real estate agents would accumulate the wealth of you owning a home for however long you stayed in the home. Absolutely disgusting.
Systematically designed.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing, Laura.
Thank you for having me, Sam.
Let's hope we hear more, and let's hope your scholars are safe tonight. I guess we need Laura's chair. Yeah.